North Las Vegas, Nevada, 2002.
Carno, emergency. I am at Comstock Trailer Park. Okay, just a second. Take a deep breath. I know, I feel like I'm going to throw up.
A murder investigation revealed discovery.
Why would they do that to our family? Somebody has to know something.
A never-ending list of unspeakable crimes.
He threatened to rape
Random people, but not to our family.
And every suspect points to another.
Offensive.
My client is just a stupid puppet.
If looks could kill, he probably would have been dead on the spot. Gotcha.
All murderers are bad, but some are diabolical. Las Vegas is a playground, a place to surrender to one's wildest impulses. But in the winter of 2002, Sin City's dark side spreads its tentacles to a cozy suburb on the north side of town.
Call me. I'm getting word now because your work called and said that you weren't there yet. But call me, okay?
33-year-old housewife Suzanne Carno has been trying to reach
Wednesday, January 30th, 5:44 a.m.
Suzanne Carno was notified. Richard was a creature of habit, and he left at a
I've been finding it in 2 hours. Okay, go ahead.
Suzanne had driven through the city, tracked his routes, and could not find him.
Wednesday, January 30th, 6:37 a.m. I called the police. I called the hospital.
Suzanne calls probably 20 times. Are you there, Richard? I'm going crazy worrying about you. Please, call me.
Unable to reach her husband, Suzanne decides to check in with his mother in Northern California.
I get a telephone call from Suzanne. And he hasn't shown up at work.
I haven't heard from him.
I'm in California, they're in Nevada. I don't know what to do. I'm absolutely out of my mind.
Rich, Mom, Suzanne said she hasn't heard from you in 6 hours and she's really concerned.
Yes, hello?
So my mom called me at work, and I could tell by her voice that something was wrong. And she'd asked if I'd heard from him, and I hadn't. I'm a really optimistic person, so I think I was hoping for the best, but there was definitely a sense of dread that something happened.
Carno, emergency. I think I found a dead body. Okay, where are you at? I am at Comstock Trailer Park. Okay, okay, just a second. Take a deep breath. I know, I feel like I'm gonna throw up. Okay, all right, okay. We're out inside the he's right next to Comstock, and he's sitting in a small green car. He's on the passenger side. He has a bag over his head, no noose around his neck, and he's laying back in the passenger seat. Okay, all right. I have officer rolling code there, okay?
It was just a regular work day. We were at the office, and our supervisor just said, hey, we got a call. We're rolling on a body in a car up on Las Vegas Boulevard North.
When Las Vegas Metro PD detective Rob Wilson and his partner arrive at the entrance to the Comstock Trailer Park, they find a green 1993 Ford Escort parked by the side of a busy road.
There was a male seated in the front passenger seat. He was leaning back and to the left to where the upper portion of his body was between the driver's seat and the passenger seat and protruding into the back. You could see that there was plastic and duct tape around his head. There were some zip ties. There was a section of rope that was in the vehicle also. It was pretty apparent that it was a murder.
The car is transported to the crime lab, with the body still inside.
We didn't enter the vehicle at all at that point, and then the body was removed by the coroner's office in a more controlled environment.
Fingerprints confirm the victim is Richard Carno. 30 hours after he went missing, Richard's family is notified of his murder.
A mother doesn't ever prepare herself for anybody to say that their son is dead. And all I could do was say no, no, no. Not my son. It was the worst thing that I've ever experienced in my entire life.
I lost all feeling in my legs and I just kind of collapsed to the floor, just kind of inconsolable. These are things that happen on TV to random people, but not to our family.
Detective Wilson is given the task to reach out to Richard Carno's widow.
She told us that everything was fine between her and her husband. They weren't having any marital issues. From all the information that we received from family, from friends, from coworkers, from bosses, Richard Carno was a good man. He spent time with his kids. He was a family man, and he cared about his family.
Suzanne and Richard's marriage is the second for each of them. And Richard took great pride in how they were blending together his son and her 2 children to make their family.
Richard loved being a dad.
Me and my dad were very close. Really amazing person. Really big heart. And just a great person to be around.
When the story of Richard's murder hits the local news, the shocking crime captivates all of North Las Vegas.
4 years ago, Richard Carno met his future wife, Suzanne. Rich proposed, and 6 months later, they were married. Last week, the fairy tale disappeared.
Well, Wednesday, he kissed me goodbye like every day, put the baby in bed with me, and went to work. I couldn't sleep, because we always touch feet at night. I couldn't find his feet in the bed. Why would they do that to our family? We don't do anything. We don't drink. We don't go out. I mean, somebody has to see something. Somebody has to know something.
Suzanne Carno's plea for help has people all across Sin City talking.
Multiple people saw the victim running towards the front of the complex.
And what they have to say is going to escalate this case to a brand new level of horror.
Her husband died 2 months ago.
He's dead.
She remarried, and her second husband is murdered.
My client is just a stupid puppet who allowed himself to be used.
If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would not believe that that's what happened.
North Las Vegas, Nevada, February 2002. Following Richard Carno's murder, the father of four's widow, Suzanne, takes to the airwaves of the local news.
And they said that they found his car. And they found somebody in the car, too. Why would they do that to our family?
She pleads with the community for help.
We don't do anything. We don't drink. I mean, somebody has to see something. Somebody has to know something. They have to find them.
Richard's family maintains that he has no criminal affiliations or known enemies.
If my son was into drugs, stealing, gangs, I might expect a call that something's happened to him. But he's just not that kind of guy.
But as the investigation gets underway, it's a possibility Las Vegas detectives cannot ignore.
The woman who called 911 was a resident of the trailer park.
I think I found a dead body. I am at Comstock Trailer Park.
It was low-income housing for many different people that struggled financially.
Most homicides in this area are usually linked to one of three things: drugs, domestic violence, or gangs.
How did he get there? How did my son get in front of this trailer park on Las Vegas Boulevard? That's not even near where he works. We had more questions than we ever had answers.
Police began canvassing the trailer park shortly after the discovery of Richard's body, and they located several witnesses who had important information to share with authorities.
These witnesses describe a bizarre spectacle on the afternoon of January 30th.
They noticed a man fitting Richard's description running through the trailer park in distress. They saw that he had duct tape binding his hands together at the wrist. They also noticed that he had duct tape around his ankles.
And another shorter male going after him caught up to him and brought him back. And then he was placed in handcuffs and eventually put into the vehicle.
Here was a man who was duct taped at his wrists, fleeing for his life, and yet no one called the police.
None of the witnesses saw Richard Carno alive again.
A single phone call probably would have saved Richard's life. But this is a tough neighborhood. You're not really supposed to call the police in a neighborhood like this without consequence.
But 19-year-old James Walsh bravely steps forward, breaking the unwritten rule.
James Walsh told us that on the morning of January 30th, John Ray showed up at his trailer with a green Ford Escort.
Walsh explains that John Ray sometimes stays at his house, and he's bad news.
And a blanket was placed over top of the car to obscure the front windshield and the side windows. It was there for a while, and James reported seeing that the blanket had fallen off, and he could see that there was someone inside.
He was shocked at what he saw. He saw Richard Carno restrained with duct tape. Rarely do you have this kind of direct witness to a kidnapping and events leading up to a homicide. He was a very important witness.
Why is there some guys like bound up in your car?
James Walsh told us that the reason he didn't come forward initially was because John Ray had threatened to rape his sister.
You want to have a propane accident in the middle of the night?
And blow up his trailer. And he had actually seen John Ray bring a pipe bomb into his trailer on one occasion. John Ray was the kind of person that could cause problems for James. He was afraid of John Ray.
36-year-old John Brian Ray is well known to law enforcement in North Las Vegas.
John Ray had a criminal history that included drugs and violence towards individuals.
He is a rough, living on the edges, drug addict who needed money constantly.
John Ray had been arrested for aiming a firearm in a threatening manner. You don't point a gun at someone unless you've got some issues. And so there was a propensity that we could see for irrational behavior.
There's one more thing about John Brian Ray that stuns detectives.
John Brian Ray is Suzanne Carno's brother.
And I said, what? Suzanne's brother, what did he have to do with it? Well, apparently, this John Brian Ray was a real bad dude. And to me, it was just so confusing because I never met him at all.
Did your husband have any enemies?
Detectives hope Suzanne Carno can explain why her brother would want to harm her husband.
Except my brother, John.
It was apparent to us as we spoke to Suzanne Carno that her brother didn't like Richard.
It's so stupid, but he thought, that he wasn't a real man.
She told us that John was upset with Richard because he would do the laundry in the home, and he felt like that was, I guess, women's work or something.
You got her doing your laundry now?
He said he wanted to kill Richard, but I didn't think he was serious.
Suzanne claimed that John Ray was willing to kill a good man because he thought Richard was gay.
A killer is on the loose, and a manhunt for a likely armed and dangerous suspect begins. But when a somber occasion takes a peculiar turn,
A normal person wouldn't put a baby on a dead body.
investigators realize there's much more to this case than meets the eye.
But why there? Of all the places in Las Vegas, why there?
If looks could kill, he probably would have been dead on the spot.
It's been 4 days since Richard Carno was found dead in his car on North Las Vegas Boulevard. The hunt is on to find the prime suspect, Richard's 36-year-old brother-in-law, John Brian Ray.
John Ray was Suzanne's brother. He was the troubled one of the family. I knew John had an addiction problem. I knew he did drugs.
He's also armed, dangerous, and on the loose. As the search intensifies, investigators receive a valuable tip from members of John's own family.
The father and one of the brothers came forward and gave us information to help us locate John.
Detectives find him holed up at a friend's apartment in North Las Vegas. He offers no resistance.
The detectives gave us a call and said they had arrested Suzanne's brother. And I thought, hey, this Las Vegas police, they're terrific. Within 1 week, someone's murdered, and now they have who's done it.
John Ray was transported to the homicide office so that Detective Michelanis and I could interview him. However, when we went in to talk to him, he refused to talk to us without an attorney. And the evil that it must take to do something like that to someone who was a good person, it's incredible to me.
John Brian Ray is booked into the Clark County Jail on counts of kidnapping and murder. He is denied bail.
He was stoic throughout the whole thing. Police found no assistance from John Ray. He did not want to talk to him or discuss any of the details of what had happened.
The first time when I saw him arraigned, I stared at him. And if looks could kill, he probably would have been dead on the spot right then, because I just bored holes through him. I just stared, because I'd never met the man before.
Richard Carno's family and his wife Suzanne are relieved to have his killer behind bars. But they're far from being able to understand John Ray's motive.
My daughters and I, we would sit, we would talk, and we'd throw things back and forth as if we had kind of our suspicions, but how would the brother know? How would the brother get to him? How would he get over by a trailer park? The brother didn't drive, the brother didn't have a car. So how, we just didn't have any answers.
Investigators are asking questions as well.
Why did John Ray choose that trailer park to bring the car? I mean, why there? Of all the places in Las Vegas, why there? He had some sort of a support system there that he was relying on.
As prosecutors build their case against John Brian Ray, they reconsider the motive Suzanne had suggested.
He was very shy with girls, and I had asked him at one point, if you're gay, you can tell me. It's totally cool with me. And I have zero reason to think that he was gay.
Definitely, my son Richard was not gay. He was the most heterosexual man you'd ever want to meet. He loved women, he loved dating women, and then he married one lady prior to Suzanne.
It seemed a ridiculous thing to bring up even in the investigation.
For now, even with a shaky motive, all evidence points to the conclusion that detectives have found their man. With Richard Carno's killer in jail, family and friends gather for the somber occasion of his funeral.
It was an open casket. I'd walked up with my mom and my sister, and obviously this is a gut-wrenching time.
However, there's one member of the family who seems to be grieving in an unusual way.
Suzanne exhibited just behaviors that normal adults didn't exhibit. She brought the baby, Jack, and had him in the open casket sitting on my brother's chest. It was a very bizarre thing. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would not believe that that's what happened, because a normal person wouldn't put a baby on a dead body.
I was so stunned, I had to walk out of the room.
After the funeral, Richard's family gathers, and the topic of Suzanne's odd behavior is on everyone's mind.
There were 12 of us family members, and we got a bank of hotel rooms at a hotel with one that had a big suite, so we could get together in the evenings and, you know, eat dinner and talk and stuff like that.
My daughters and I had kind of our suspicions.
No, it was just a normal
We were just kicking things around about Suzanne. It seemed like she acted a little kooky, I suppose is what the comment would be.
It was strange in its juvenile nature. I called Las Vegas Metro PD and told them that we had this gut feeling that she's somehow involved.
As it turns out, they are not the only ones with a bad feeling about Suzanne Carno.
I was a professor at the University of Nevada at Las Vegas and the Department of Consciousness Studies. I have pretty vivid memory of going into work that one morning, and my assistant, April, greeted me and said that Ms. Carno had been on TV talking about her husband who had been murdered.
Why would they do that to our family?
I thought, as anybody would, oh, how terrible for her husband.
I couldn't sleep because we always touch your feet at night.
And then also I had an aha experience. It was like all these things that didn't make sense all just sort of fell together. I see, I see.
Why would they do that to our family?
5 months before the murder of Richard Carno.
Hello, I'm Professor Moody.
UNLV professor Dr. Raymond Moody welcomes a new group of students to his popular class, Near-Death Experiences.
How does the death of a loved one...
One of the things we did in that course was to talk about the grieving process.
I'd like to start with...
One of Dr. Moody's students that semester stands out from day one.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Carno.
Miss Carno seemed to have a very personal and intimate fascination with the material.
So how long would that last, the grief?
A few weeks into the semester, Suzanne shares a tragedy with the entire class.
My husband, he's dead.
Wow.
She told me that her husband had died and that she was very upset about her children and wanting to know from me what she should say to her children.
Suzanne, I'm so sorry. What happened?
Horrible, Suzanne.
There were people there who were very concerned about her plight and tried to help her. But from the very beginning, there was just a strange note.
I just don't think it's really sunk in for me yet.
I've talked with a lot of people who lost their loved ones, so I know how that goes. And what she was telling me, it just didn't jive.
The strangest thing about Suzanne's plea is that it occurs 4 months before her tearful news appearance.
A student was very puzzled, like just fairly recently she had been trying to help this woman over the loss of her husband, and now her husband is, what, been resurrected and is now dead again?
Somebody has to know something.
As detectives expand their investigation, they discover a very different woman than the grieving wife on television.
From the moment I met Suzanne, she had two different sides to her. She came to me one day and she's like, "How would you feel about me adopting you?" I was hoping that it would make me be a part of the family. But I was Cinderella and her kids were the stepsisters, and of course, the stepmother was Suzanne.
My son tells me, well, she's going to adopt him, but she doesn't like his name. And I thought, well, why change the child's name? He's had his name all this time. Why change it?
She changed my name from Trevor Adam to Dominic Owen. I've gotten so used to being called Nick, even though Trevor is my birth name. It was pretty scary. She wanted to have full control of me.
We thought it was really odd that she had him change his name. I think she may have wanted to change his name just to control every little aspect of everything.
Suzanne's exertion of power extends over everything in the household, including the family's finances.
Richard had expressed to some coworkers about how much money they were spending and how in debt they were.
They were in significant financial distress. They had over $40,000 in credit card debt. Suzanne was unemployed. Richard worked long hours to pay the bills, but it certainly wasn't enough. And this caused a great deal of stress on the relationship.
Suzanne and Richard, I believe in the summer prior to the murder, had purchased a life insurance policy. Each would benefit to the tune of $500,000 if they died.
One of the coworkers had also expressed that Richard was not happy about having to spend money on life insurance policies, which Suzanne had told him that she really wanted him to have.
I think it was a very shocking number for a couple who had just recently gotten married, and the way we looked at it, they weren't of the means to be able to afford that large of a policy.
Suzanne's behavior certainly looks suspicious. But investigators already have their perp. When they ask John Ray about his sister, he refuses to say anything. So investigators decide to up the ante.
Suzanne spent a lot of time at the gravesite. They found it a little unusual that the baby would play on the grave while she sat there for hours. And we felt like it was possible that she might actually be talking to Richard or saying things to Richard that could also be incriminating. And so we came up with the idea of planting a listening device at the gravesite.
What they learn will shock the conscience.
It was pure evil. How can you do that to someone you love?
There is a feeling in the pit of your stomach like, oh my God, she could get away with this.
Richard Carno died because of the cold, manipulative, and greedy actions of his loving wife.
Although John Brian Ray, the prime suspect in the murder of Richard Carno, is behind bars, Las Vegas detectives believe that his sister Suzanne, Richard Carno's wife, is involved. But they can't prove anything.
And so we came up with the idea of planting a listening device at the gravesite so that if she did say something incriminating, that we would possibly be able to capture that and use it against her. After we had planted the device, a groundskeeper for the cemetery came by and picked it up and threw it into the dumpster. Long story short, we weren't able to get anything incriminating.
With only circumstantial evidence suggesting her involvement, the case against Suzanne is non-existent. But police are far from finished.
So we received a tip from an anonymous male who said Suzanne's computer contained information that would prove that she was not the grieving widow that she was portraying herself to be.
I remember police coming in and confiscating computers.
The computer had been wiped. When we analyzed it, it was back to factory settings.
Wiping the computer is highly suspicious. And if relevant evidence was destroyed, also highly illegal. Fortunately, detectives aren't out of options just yet.
John Brian Ray had a computer at his place of business. He was a security guard somewhere in a little shack, really, in North Las Vegas. So Metro picked up the computer, took it back for analysis.
We found emails between John Ray and his sister, Suzanne Carno.
At first glance, the emails appear to be ordinary communication between siblings.
The emails were about a bookshelf that Suzanne supposedly wanted John Ray to build for her. And she told him that she was willing to pay him $50 to do it, but that she wanted it done right away. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Why would you be so intent on a bookcase being built that if you don't do it, I'll get someone else who will? We felt that that was code that she was using to express to John that she wanted him to commit this murder for hire, and that she was willing to pay him the $50, which we believe was $50,000 from the insurance money. And it was nice of her to sign it, your sister. She's reminding him that there's a loyalty there between the two of them. I'm your sister. I was so happy. I was ecstatic, really. I mean, because it confirmed her basically hiring her brother to commit this murder. And it came from her email account. She signed it with her name. It was great.
Investigators believe that in the early morning of January 30th, Suzanne Carno knowingly sent her husband to his death.
She convinced her brother to wait outside in the dark for Richard to come out and go to work at 4:12 in the morning when he always did. She knew that John was going to get the drop on Richard when he went to his car.
But John Brian Ray doesn't kill Richard right away. He holds him hostage all day long.
I don't know why he kept him basically captive in the car for such a long period of time, but maybe he was just waiting for darkness. And so John wrapped plastic and duct tape around Richard's head, and he died from lack of oxygen. It was pure evil. How can you do that to someone you hate, let alone to someone you supposedly love?
Now, the thing about him being upset that Richard was gay, I don't buy that for a minute. I think John Brian Ray did it to get money for drugs.
On October 24th, 2002, Suzanne Carno is arrested for the murder of her husband, Richard.
I just remember them handcuffing her and taking her away, and I could just see the mad look on her face, and I so bad wanted to chase her down and just smile and wave.
Gotcha.
Prosecutors seek the death penalty for both John Ray and Suzanne Carno. The key to proving premeditation is Suzanne's attendance at Dr. Moody's class.
She prepped the whole situation by practicing grieving, taking a class on near-death experiences.
She was doing a dry run on how she can act as a grieving widow.
He's dead.
How stupid. I mean, she should have gone to an acting coach if she wants to know how to act like she's grieving. I mean, I'm a psychiatrist and I can't teach acting.
You may find her odd. You may find her offensive. You may find her vulgar. You may find her to be the biggest liar in town.
Suzanne Carno and John Brian Ray are tried together in January of 2004.
When you go through a murder trial like this, there is a feeling in the pit of your stomach like, oh my God, she could get away with this.
Richard Carno died because of the cold, manipulative, and greedy actions of his loving wife, Susan Carno, who used her brother, John Brian Ray, to commit this horrific killing. Suzanne's defense was John Brian Ray, along with James Walsh, killed Richard Carno.
John Ray's lawyer does his best to paint Suzanne as the mastermind of the crime.
If Suzanne is the master puppeteer that she appears to be, then my client John Ray is just a stupid puppet who allowed himself to be used.
He was stoic throughout the whole thing. He was emotionless. Through the trial, he barely, showed any emotion.
All the evidence validified what we all believed, that she's evil, and she hired and manipulated her brother to the point where he was willing to commit murder for her of her husband.
State versus Suzanne Carno. Count number 1, guilty of conspiracy to murder.
Nearly 2 years after Richard Carno was found dead in his car, The jury finds Suzanne and John guilty on all counts. They are sentenced to life in prison and won't be eligible for parole until 2044. For Richard's family, the victory is bittersweet. But this is not Suzanne Carno's last day in court.
Shortly after the trial is when my grandson, Nick, confessed to me of what Suzanne was really doing to him at home.
Nick describes years of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse.
She would choke me to the point of passing out. I wanted to tell my dad what Suzanne was doing to me, but she threatened to kill me the very first time she started doing this to me. I need a minute. I wish she would go to hell and stay there for the rest of her life.
Suzanne pleads guilty to coercion of a minor. It carries a sentence of up to 4 additional years in prison.
She took our brother, and that was a huge, huge loss for our family. I miss his laughter. I miss his sunny disposition. I miss his smile. I miss calling him on his birthday. I miss spending time with him. I grieve the man that he could never be. He's a grandfather now. And I grieve that he won't hold those grandbabies.
I miss a lot of things about my dad. His big nose. I miss doing woodwork with my dad, building things, just having fun, listening to jazz. I miss all that.
I miss Rich's hugs. My son gave the biggest hugs ever, enough to crunch your bones. And I always say, watch out, Rich, you're gonna break